If you're looking at getting a Japanese knife online, or if you've been into one of our stores, you've probably heard somebody talk about a ceramic honing rod. Today, we're going to talk about what a honing rod is, how they work, which one you should get, and some other options for keeping your knife sharp. This type of honing rod is a ceramic rod that you run the edge of your knife along. It's got a little handle so that you can hold it in place when you're using it. It's got a ring so you can hang it up. And there is a steel rod running through the middle for just a little bit of extra durability. They're basically impossible to break. The only time I have seen them shatter is if line cooks are using them as swords.
If I step here, very good. And now I step again.
Essentially, a honing rod just keeps your knife edge a little bit sharper for a little bit longer. We find that our customers who use them get their knives sharpened up to half as often as those that don't get them. And sometimes people bring their knives in for sharpening and we touch them on a honing rod and they're pretty much good to go. So as you're using your knife over time and it's running into the cutting board over and over again, the edge can kind of get a little bit flattened out, it can get a little bit rolled over, and it can get a little bit of what's called a burr, which is essentially kind of like a little thin wire of material just on the edge of your knife as you're using it. What a honing rod does is it helps keep the edge clear and free of those burrs so that your knife cuts better for a lot longer. A honing rod is not really a substitute for sharpening on a whetstone, so it works a little bit more like kind of a toothbrush rather than going to the dentist. You just want to brush your teeth, use your honing rod, and then you go to the dentist every 6 months or so, get it sharpened. There's 3 overall types of honing rods. There is steel honing rods, which is what most people think of when they think honing rods. Even the name steel and honing rod is often used interchangeably, which can kind of mix a couple of people up. The steel honing rods tend to be made of softer material, so they're great for German knives, they're great in a pinch, they'll put a quick and aggressive edge on your knife, but we don't like them as much for Japanese knives, which are made of harder steel because they can actually cut into the steel honing rod a little bit and chip your knife. They also have a pretty rough texture, which can be pretty hard on your edge. Another type is diamond honing rods, which actually have an abrasive on the side, so it's really more of an actual sharpener, kind of masquerading as a honing rod. This type of honing rod will get a quick and aggressive edge on your knife, but it'll also eat through your edge really quickly, so as you're using it over time, especially if you're using it multiple times a day, it'll make your knife really thick really quickly. Because Japanese knives are so hard and thin, which makes them cut really well, we only recommend ceramic honing rods. Some people who are really into taking care of their Japanese knives like to just tune up their knives on a whetstone every time they use them, which is fine, but for the average person at home who's maybe just trying to make dinner really quickly and doesn't want to pull out a whole setup, a honing rod is more than enough to get your knife in good shape. The main difference is that whetstones have an abrasive in them and they are taking steel off of your knife, whereas the honing rod more just removes the burr, keeps the edge straight, and keeps your knife cutting well. A honing rod can knock off loose steel, but it doesn't grind like a stone does. So we've got 2 types of honing rods. We've got a white honing rod and a black honing rod, and they are different in more than color. So the white one here is roughly the texture equivalent of a 4000 grit stone, but remember there's no abrasive. It's a little bit harder than the black rod, so it may do a better job of pushing the steel around. The white rod is really great for deburring after sharpening, it's great for people working in a kitchen, and just for your everyday edge. If you have a mixture of Japanese and non-Japanese knives, this is probably the right one for you. The black honing rod, on the other hand, is not quite as hard as the white rod. It's got a slightly finer texture, so a little bit more like the equivalent of a 6000 grit stone. Again, no abrasive, but might be pushing around the steel a little bit differently. This one is really great for a finely polished edge. If you're honing a single bevel knife on a honing rod, the black one is maybe the way to go. If you really want to get nerdy about it, the leather paddle strap is a great option as well. It does a similar job to the honing rods, but adds just a little extra layer of sharpness. So when you're using a honing rod, I like to use it straight up and down, not kind of Gordon Ramsay style.
Slow strokes over the top of the steel.
I like to grab a rag to place my honing rod on so that it's not going to be scooting around on me. And then you take your knife, you're going to kind of line it up right along this guard here. So there's a thin side and a little bit wider side. The thin side is your angle guide for Japanese knives, and the wider side is your angle guide for German style and other knives. So at my thinner angle, at about 15 degrees, I'm gonna line up the spine of my knife, tip it in to about 15 degrees, which is what it's sharpened at, and then I'm just gonna pull toward me. Super gentle. I'm gonna do it on the other side and move back and forth, kind of 8 to 10 times. I'm not using a lot of pressure at all, just very gently. And that's it. At home, you'll want to do that once or twice a week. In a kitchen, you'll probably want to do it a couple times a shift. Let us know if you have any questions, and tell us which one is your favorite below. And if it's time for your knife to get a proper sharpening and these guys aren't cutting it for you anymore, go check out one of our knife sharpening videos.
Yeah, so if you drop it, they don't explode.
Which they do sometimes.
Yeah, less
If you're a line cook.
Yeah.
Cool.